next, after 1980, it was run by the Commission on Presidential Debates, which was also unbiased. But President Biden and President Trump said we're not going to use the Commission on Debates. Now we're going to make a separate deal with CNN. And we now know what happened in that. The New York Times was reported in their conversations where President Biden said, we are not going to be on the stage with Robert Kennedy. So we want you to keep him off. And if you have rules that let him on, then we're not coming. And for CNN, it's tens of millions of dollars for that debate. And then they're going to get
Why did Trump agree to that?
And they're going to get hundreds of millions. Well, he went back and forth on it. So the Republicans were not entirely good on that. But he did say publicly, I think he should be on the debate.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then the same thing happened with ABC, and they adopted rules that actually I was able to reach their metrics, their thresholds, but they still kept me off the debating stage. And that's illegal. Clearly, it's illegal under FEC rules. You're not allowed to deliberately exclude another candidate from the debate without neutral rules. And you're not allowed to develop rules specifically to keep somebody off the debate. Otherwise, the debate itself becomes an illegal campaign contribution. And,
right, of course.
And that's why, Trump's lawyer, went to jail for that. Right? So what they were doing was criminal. The FEC is an anemic organization that is half the commissioners are Republican, half are Democrat. So none of them care about an independent, and so they just didn't act on it. About 3 months ago, President Biden and Kamala Harris gave this statement about Vladimir Putin, where they said they were ridiculing him because he had won the Russian election with, I think he got 88% of the vote. And they said, well, that's because he didn't let anybody else run against him and because he controlled the media. So, that's not really democracy. Well, that was the same system they put in place over here. So the whole thing was an irony, but, that is also the fact the Democratic Party abandoned democracy was another part of this inversion that has taken place. And that my wife saw that process firsthand. And I think, it changed some of her worldview and made her, she wasn't happy about me endorsing President Trump at all. And did not want me to do it, but it became, I think, tolerable for her, where she, and that was important for me to have her on board.
Right. So can I ask you a little bit about what I've seen as a major transformation on the Trump side? And it's allayed some of my concerns hypothetically about the manner in which he might conduct an administration. Like, I think he made a major error in the debate with Harris, not stressing continually the makeup of the team that he's gathered around him. At the moment, I was joking with some people earlier today about the fact that if I was an American, which I'm not, I would vote for Trump merely because Musk said he would head a commission on investigation into inefficiencies in government. And to me, that's a stunning opportunity, because Musk has shown time and time again that he can do exactly that sort of thing. He has Musk, he has you, he has Tulsi Gabbard, he has J.D. Vance, he has Vivek Ramaswamy. I mean, first of all, these are unlikely Republicans, to say the least, and they're also remarkable people. And so it seems to me that along with the inversion of the Democrats that you described and laid out in multiple dimensions, there's also been a transformation not only of the Republicans in the way you said, but also in the team that's gathered around Trump himself. And so, well, I'm curious what you think about Trump per se. You've met with him many times now, and you guys have obviously cobbled together something approximating a functional agreement. He obviously listened to you on the health front, but then there's these other people that are surrounding him at the moment too that seem to be, well, they remind me in some ways of you. They're not the typical political players. They're much more entrepreneurial. They're certainly not classic Republicans. And so how are things going with you and Trump? You said a bunch of things about the Democrats that were critical, but you haven't yet elucidated your opinions with regards to Trump and the team that's around him now. So I'm curious about your sentiments in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I had, multiple discussions. I got a call from about 2 hours after President Trump's shooting in Butler. I got a call from a guy called Kelly Means, who is really a genius who's been on the forefront of reforming our food system and, dealing with the chronic disease epidemic. He and his sister, Casey Means, who did this wonderful interview with Tucker that, introduced a lot of people to them. He called me and he said to me, are you interested in talking to the Trump team about, some kind of a partnership about perhaps unifying your parties? And and I said no immediately. And then I actually called my family members and talked to, a number of my immediate family members. And they said, you should talk to him. My wife said, you should talk to him, but she was not thinking about unifying the party. She was just thinking that he had just been shot and that, because I came from a background where my uncle, my father were killed by assassins, that it would be a compassionate thing to talk to him. But my kids were, you should talk to him about hearing him out on what he has in mind. And so I then sent Kelly Means a text saying, I'm interested. And then a few minutes later, I got a three-way text from Tucker Carlson with an unknown number that was President Trump's cell phone. And he said, will you guys talk? And then I said yes. And a few minutes later, I got a call from President Trump. And we talked probably for 30 or 35 minutes. And we talked about a whole lot of issues, different issues, and, about his shooting and about the issues that I was interested in. And he expressed a kind of at that point, which was a conformance with me on some of that, alignment with me on some of those issues. And we agreed to meet the next day, and we ended up meeting in Milwaukee, and we had, I think, probably about 2.5 hours together. And at that point, we talked about the food system. We talked about the chronic disease epidemic. We talked about the neocons and the addiction to war. And I was impressed by his just, I would say, visceral revulsion about the neocons and about their view of an imperium abroad and a national security state at home, which go hand in hand because imperialism abroad is inconsistent with democracy at home. And with also his abhorrence for censorship, which he was, again, it was visceral with him. And I think part of that is because he's seen it in action. He's been the target of censorship the same as I have. And so then we agreed that maybe there was grounds to meet on. They wanted me to do something at the convention, the Republican convention, and I was not ready to do anything. And then after that, I actually contacted the Harris campaign to see if she would have a conversation with me. And she just said outright no. And then
why do you think that was? I mean, you'd think a conversation
I don't know. To me, it's unimaginable that, you wouldn't have a conversation, that kind of conversation, particularly because, because the race can be so close. It's going to be within 2 or 3 points. And I had a following enough that was large enough to swing it one way or the other. And at least theoretically. So, I wouldn't.
Is it guilt by association? Is it something like that? I mean, I've had a lot of experience with Democrats who would talk to me.
Radioactive to the Democratic Party. And also they believe their own publicity. So they're all reading the New York Times and watching CNN. And if you're living in that information ecosystem, first of all, you'll never see me explain my own issues. What you'll hear is that, I'm anti-vax and that I'm anti-science and that I'm a crazy person and that I'm a lunatic and, all the other things that are just are kind of the standard defamations and perjuries about me on the Democratic controlled media or aligned media. So, and they're probably believing parts of that, and so who knows?
That might also be part of it. I
can't look into her mind and explain what they did, or why they did. I could speculate a lot, but what's the point? And I continued having conversations with the Trump campaign and with President Trump himself, in a number of personal conversations.
Imagine waking up one day, your entire world turned upside down. That's the reality for countless families in Israel right now. Communities shattered, lives uprooted, and a constant threat looming overhead. It's a stark reminder of how quickly peace can crumble. In times of chaos, it's not just about surviving, it's about standing firm, showing solidarity, and taking action. That's where the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews comes in. They're not just watching from the sidelines, they're on the ground providing real, tangible support. Now, as we approach the one-year mark of October 7th, the Fellowship is launching something truly remarkable. It's called the Flags of Fellowship campaign, and it's a powerful way for us to show that we remember, we care, and we stand united. On October 6th, churchyards across America will be transformed into seas of blue and white. Each Israeli flag planted represents a life lost, a story cut too short. It's more than just a visual tribute, it's a statement to the world that we will never forget. You can be part of Flags of Fellowship too. There's a tremendous need for food and basic supplies for evacuating families trying to survive in communities impacted by the ongoing war. That's why we're asking 1,200 of our listeners today to make a gift of $100 to help provide emergency food boxes for a displaced family in Israel. Israel needs our support now more than ever. So here's what I need you to do right now. Go to jordanforthefellowship.org. That's one word, jordanforthefellowship.org. Remember, jordanforthefellowship.org. God bless and thank you.
And I ended up going to Mar-a-Lago with Amaryllis, my daughter-in-law, who runs my campaign. And we sat down with Don Jr. and with President Trump and Susie Wiles' campaign manager for several hours and talked through these issues. And we agreed to do a unity campaign where we would, like they have in Europe, where there are, there's coalitions where you don't give up your own independence or your capacity to criticize your allies on things with which you don't agree with them. And he was very agreeable to that, and on the issues that we don't agree on, that I would continue to criticize him and he could criticize me without penalty, and to our alliance, and that the issues that we did agree on, he agreed to make them priorities and to involve me in some way in helping to choose the new government and helping to give emphasis to the policies that I was concerned about. And the three policies were children's health and the chronic disease epidemic, and which involves the food system and getting the corruption out of the public health agencies and out of USDA. Second, to ending the censorship and surveillance. And number three, ending the warfare state, ending the Ukraine war immediately. And all of those are issues that he
those are big issues,
had come to on his own, and that I think he appreciated my insights on some of those issues and my passion for some of those issues and my knowledge about some of those issues and expertise. And he welcomed me, my involvement. I mean, one of the things you asked me about what I sort of had come to discover about President Trump, and he said to me a number of things that were very illuminating. One is that he and Donald Jr. And J.D. Vance were absolutely had extraordinary antipathy toward what the neocons have done to our country. I was surprised about that, how knowledgeable they were and how passionate. And J.D. Vance is a soldier, and his understanding of the neocons comes out of his own, service abroad and his own military service. And then Donald Trump Jr., I don't know exactly how he came to his antagonism toward them, but it's very, very heartfelt. That gave me a lot of confidence as well, that he's surrounded by people who are close to him, that are in his family, and that are going to be involved in his administration, who agreed with me. And we talked at that time about, in fact, it was an issue that I brought up about bringing Tulsi onto the team, and they were very, very welcoming of that idea. And that, of course,
another one who had tremendous trouble with the Democrats.
Not only, and she was the deputy director of the Democratic National Committee, 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So she was a core, Democrat and a Democratic presidential candidate, Democratic congresswoman.
A formidable figure.
Yeah, and very, very formidable. And somebody that I like personally a lot and have had a long and very, very friendly relationship with. And then, but he also said something to me. He said, last time that I was in 2016, he said, we got elected, and he said, we didn't really expect that was going to